Chapter 7. Chapter 7, Section 1. Continued. Reading from page 191. The fire worship was an essential part of the system of the Persian Magi. This fire worship the Persian Magi did not pretend to have invented, but their popular story carried the origin of it up to the days of Hoshang, the father of Tamur, who founded Babylon. Wilson. The time of Nimrod. In confirmation of this, we have seen that a fragment of Apollodorus makes Ninus the head of the fire worshipper. Layard, quoting this fragment, supposes Ninus to be different from Zoroaster, but it can be proved that though many others bore the name of Zoroaster, the lines of evidence all converge, so as to demonstrate that Ninus and Nimrod and Zoroaster were one. The legends of Zoroaster show that he was known not only as a magus, but as a warrior. Arnobius. Plato says that Eros Armenius, whom Clericus in his Decaldeis states to have been the same as the fourth Zoroaster, died and rose again after 10 days, having been killed in battle, and that what he pretended to have learned in Hades he communicated to men in his new life. Read Plato De Republica. We have seen the death of Nimrod, the original Zoroaster, was not that of a warrior slain in battle, but yet this legend of the warrior Zoroaster is entirely in favor of the supposition that the original Zoroaster, the original head of the Magi, was not a priest merely, but a warrior king. Everywhere are the Zoroastrians or fire worshippers called Guebres or Gabbers. Now Genesis 10:8 proves that Nimrod was the first of the Gabbers. As Zoroaster was head of the fire worshippers, so Tammuz was evidently the same. We have seen evidence already that sufficiently proves the identity of Tammuz and Nimrod, but a few words may still more decisively prove it and cast further light on the primitive fire worship. First, in the first place, Tammuz and Adonis are proved to be the same divinity. Jerome, who lived in Palestine when the rites of Tammuz were observed, up to the very time when he wrote, expressly identifies Tammuz and Adonis in his commentary on Ezekiel, where the Jewish women are represented as weeping for Tammuz, and the testimony of Jerome on this subject is universally admitted. Then the mode in which the rites of Tammuz or Adonis were celebrated in Syria was essentially the same as the rites of Osiris. The statement of Lucian de Dea Syria strikingly shows this, and Bunsen distinctly admits it. The identity of Osiris and Nimrod has been largely proved in the body of this work. When therefore Tammuz or Adonis is identified with Osiris, the identification of Tammuz with Nimrod follows of course. And then this entirely agrees with the language of Bion in his Lament for Adonis, where he represents Venus as going in a frenzy of grief like a bacchant after the death of Adonis, through the woods and valleys and calling upon her Assyrian husband. It equally agrees with the statement of Maimonides, the Rambam, that when Tammuz was put to death, the grand scene of weeping for the death was in the temple of Babylon. Second, now if Tammuz was Nimrod, the examination of the meaning of the name confirms the connection of Nimrod with the first fire worship. After what has already been advanced, there needs no argument to show that as the Chaldeans were the first who introduced the name and power of kings, Sinkeles, and as Nimrod was unquestionably the first of these kings and the first consequently that bore the title of Moloch or king, so it was in honor of him that the children were made to pass through the fire to Moloch. By the intention of that passing through the fire was undoubtedly to purify. The name Tammuz has evidently reference to this, for it signifies to perfect, meaning to purify by fire. And if Nimrod was, as the Paschal Chronicle and the general voice of antiquity represent him to have been, the originator of fire worship, this name very exactly expresses his character in that respect. From tam, to perfect, and muz, to burn, to be pure in heart. In Scripture it is just the same as to be perfect in heart. The well-known name Doikalion, as connected with a flood, seems to be a correlative term of the water worshippers. Duch, chale, signifies to purify by washing. From dich, to wash, clavis stokii, and kale, to complete or perfect. Kol means all in Hebrew. Kol haolam, all the world. The noun from the latter verb found in 2 Chronicles 4:21 shows that the root means to purify, to perfect gold. being in the Septuagint justly rendered pure gold. There is a name sometimes applied to the king of the gods that has some bearing on this subject. That name is Akmon. What is the meaning of it? It is evidently just the Chaldee form of the Hebrew Kmun, the burner, which becomes Akmon in the same way as the Hebrew Dem, blood, Dam, in Chaldee becomes Adem. Hesychius says that Akmon is Kronos, sub voce Akmon. In Virgil, in his Aeneid, we find this name compounded so as to be an exact synonym for Tammuz, Pyrakmon being the name of one of the three famous Cyclops whom the poet introduces. We have seen that the original Cyclops were Kronos and his brethren, and deriving the name from Per, the Chaldee form of Bur, to purify, and Akmon, it just signifies the purifying burner. It is evident, however, from the Zoroastrian verse elsewhere quoted, that fire itself was worshipped as Tammuz, for it is called the Father that perfected all things. In one respect this represented fire as the creative God, but in another there can be no doubt that it had reference to the perfecting of men by purifying them, and especially it perfected those whom it consumed. This was the very idea that from time immemorial until very recently led so many widows in India to immolate themselves on the funeral piles of their husbands, the woman who thus burned herself being counted blessed, because she became sute, pure by burning. And this also, no doubt, reconciled the parents who actually sacrificed their children to Moloch, to the cruel sacrifice, the belief being cherished that the fire that consumed them also perfected them, and made them meet for eternal happiness, as both the passing through the fire and the burning in the fire were essential rites in the worship of Moloch or Nimrod. This is an argument that Nimrod was Tammuz. As the priest and representative of the perfecting or purifying fire, it was he that carried on the work of perfecting or purifying by fire, and so he was called by its name. When we turn to the legends of India, we find evidence to the very same effect as that which we have seen with regard to Zoroaster and Tammuz as head of the fire worshippers. The fifth head of Brahma that was cut off for inflicting distress on the three worlds by the effulgence of its dazzling beams, referred to in the text of this work, identifies itself with Nimrod. The fact that that fifth head was represented as having read the Vedas, or sacred books produced by the other four heads, shows, I think, a succession. The Indian Vedas that now exist do not seem to be of very great antiquity as written documents, but the legend goes much further back than anything that took place in India. The antiquity of writing seems to be very great, but whether or not there was any written religious document in Nimrod's day, a Veda there must have been. For what is the meaning of the word Veda? It is evidently just the same as the Anglo-Saxon Edda with the digamma prefixed, and both alike evidently come from ed, testimony. Hebrew ed is a witness, a religious record or confession of faith. Such a record or confession, either oral or written, must have existed from the beginning. Now coming down from Noah, what would that succession be? We have evidence from Berosus that in the days of Belus, meaning Nimrod, the custom of making representations like that of two-headed Janus had begun. Assume then that Noah, as having lived in two worlds, has his two heads. Ham is the third, Cush the fourth, and Nimrod is of course the fifth. And this fifth head was cut off for doing the very thing for which Nimrod actually was cut off. I suspect that this Indian myth is the key to open up the meaning of a statement of Plutarch, which according to the terms of it as it stands is visibly absurd. It is as followed. Plutarch, in the fourth book of his Symposiaca, says that the Egyptians were of the opinion that darkness was prior to light, and that the latter, meaning light, was produced from mice in the fifth generation at the time of the new moon. In India, we find that the new moon was produced in a different sense from the ordinary meaning of that term, and that the production of that new moon was not only important in Indian mythology, but evidently agreed in time with the period when the fifth head of Brahma scorched the world with its insufferable splendor. The account of its production runs thus, that the gods and mankind were entirely discontented with the moon which they had got, because it gave no light. Besides, the plants were poor and the fruits of no use, and that therefore they churned the white sea, or as it is commonly expressed, they churned the ocean, when all things were mingled, meaning were thrown into confusion, and that then a new moon with a new regent was appointed, which brought in an entirely new system of things. From Maurice's Indian Antiquities we learn that at this very time of the churning of the ocean, the earth was set on fire, and a great conflagration was the result. But the name of the moon in India is Soma or Som, for the final A is only a breathing, and the word is found in the name of the famous temple of Somnath, which name signifies Lord of the Moon. And the moon in India is male, just like in German, der Mond. As this transaction is symbolical, the question naturally arises, who could be meant by the moon or regent of the moon who was cast off in the 5th generation of the world? The name Som shows at once who he must have been. Som is just the name of Shem, for Shem's name comes from Shom, to appoint, and is legitimately represented either by the name Som or Sem, or as it is in Greek, and it was precisely to get rid of Shem, either after his father's death or when the infirmities of old age were coming upon him, as the great instructor of the world, Melchizedek, that is, as the great diffuser of spiritual light, that in the 5th generation the world was thrown into confusion and the earth set on fire. The propriety of Shem's being compared to the moon will appear if we consider the way in which his father Noah was evidently symbolized. The head of a family is divinely compared to the sun, as in the dream of Joseph, Genesis 37:9. And the moon is the mother. It's just like in modern astrology. The moon, emotions, the water is the woman. And the sun, the radiator of energy and giver of everything, is the father. And today, of course, it is satanically reversed everywhere we look. And it may be easily conceived how Noah would, by his posterity in general, be looked up to as occupying the paramount place as the son of the world, and accordingly Bryant, Davies, Faber, and others have agreed in recognizing Noah as so symbolized by paganism. When, however, his younger son, for Shem was younger than Japhet, Genesis 10:21, was substituted for his father, to whom the world had looked up in comparison of the greater light, Shem would naturally, especially by those who disliked him and rebelled against him, be compared to the lesser light or the moon. As to the kingdom, the Oriental Oneirocritics jointly say that the sun is the symbol of the king and the moon of the next to him in power. This sentence, extracted from Daubuse's Symbolical Dictionary, illustrates with judicious notes by my learned friend, the Reverend A. Forbes from London, shows that the conclusion to which I had come before seeing it in regard to the symbolical meaning of the moon is entirely in harmony with Oriental modes of thinking. Now the production of light by mice at this period comes in exactly to confirm this deduction. A mouse in Chaldee is Akbar, like in Arabic also. In Hebrew, Akbar is mouse. And Gebel or Keber in Arabic, Turkish, and some of the other Eastern dialects becomes Akbar, as in the well-known Muslim saying, Allah Akbar, God is great or greater. So that the whole statement of Plutarch, when stripped of its nonsensical garb, just amounts to this, that light was produced by the Guebres or fire worshippers, when Nimrod was set up in opposition to Shem, as the representative of Noah and the great enlightener of the world. The story of Phaethon. The identity of Phaethon and Nimrod has much to support it, besides the prima facie evidence arising from the statement that Phaethon was an Ethiopian or a Cushite, and a resemblance of his fate in being cast down from heaven while driving the chariot of the sun, as the child of the sun, to the casting down of Molch Gebel, whose very name, as the god of fire, identifies him with Nimrod. First, Phaethon is said by Apollodorus to have been the son of Titonus, but if the meaning of the name Titonus be examined, it will be evident that he was Titonus himself. Titonus was the husband of Aurora. In the physical sense, as we have already seen, Aurora signifies the awakener of the light. To correspond with this, Titonus signifies the kindler of light or the setter on fire. From Zet or Zit, to kindle or set on fire, which in Chaldee becomes tit, and ton, to give. Anitenlicha in Hebrew means I give you. So, same word here. Now Phaethon, the son of Titonus, is in Chaldee Phaethon bar Titon, but this also signifies Phaethon, the sun that set on fire. Assuming then the identity of Phaethon and Titonus, This goes far to identify Phaethon with Nimrod, for Homer, as we have seen in his Odyssey, mentions the marriage of Aurora with Orion the mighty hunter, whose identity with Nimrod is established. Then the name of the celebrated son that sprang from the union between Aurora and Tithonus shows that Tithonus, in his original character, must have been indeed the same as the mighty hunter of Scripture, for the name of that son was Memnon. Read Martial and Ovid's Metamorphosen, which signifies the son of the spotted one, thereby identifying the father with Nimrod, whose emblem was the spotted leopard skin. As Ninus or Nimrod was worshipped as the son of his own wife, and that wife Aurora, the goddess of the dawn, we see how exact is the reference to Phaethon when Isaiah, speaking of the king of Babylon, who was his representative, says, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning?" Isaiah 14:12. The marriage of Orion with Aurora, in other words, his setting up as the kindler of light, or becoming the author of fire worship, is said by Homer to have been the cause of his death, he having in consequence perished under the wrath of the gods. That Phaethon was currently represented as the son of Aurora, the common story was related by Ovid, sufficiently proves. While Phaethon claimed to be the son of Phoebus, or the sun, he was reproached with being only the son of Merops, of the mortal husband of his mother Clymene. Read Metamorphosen of Ovid. The story implies that that mother gave herself out to be Aurora, not in the physical sense of the term, but in its mystical sense, as the woman pregnant with light, and consequently her son was held up as the great light bringer, who was to enlighten the world, Lucifer, the son of the morning, who was the pretended enlightener of the souls of men. The name Lucifer in Isaiah is the very word from which Elelois, one of the names of Bacchus, evidently comes. It comes from Hellel, which signifies to irradiate or to bring to light, like in Hallelujah. It has to do with light, with worship, Hallel, and is equivalently to the name Titon. Now we have evidence that Lucifer, the son of Aurora, or the morning, was worshipped in the very same character as Nimrod when he appeared in his new character as a little child. Another addition here, Lucifer in Hebrew is called Hillel ben Shachar, Hillel ben Shachar, the son of the dawn. So the star, the Mercury star that arises just before the sun comes up, since Mercury is always either right behind the sun or in front of the sun, since it's the planet that's the closest to the sun and stays there all the time. Okay. This Phaethon, or Lucifer, who was cast down in further proved to be Janus, for Janus is called Pater Matutinus in Horace, and the meaning of this name will appear in one of its aspects when the meaning of the name of the Dea Matuta is ascertained. Dea Matuta signifies the kindling or light-bringing goddess, and accordingly by Priscian she is identified with Aurora. Matuta comes from the same word as Tithonus, Tzet, Tzit, or Tzut, which in Chaldee becomes Tet, Tit, or Tut, to light or set on fire. From Tit, to set on fire, comes the Latin Titio, a firebrand, and from Tut, with a formative M prefixed, comes Matuta, just as from Nasse, to forget, with the same formative prefix, comes Manasseh, forgetting, the name of the eldest son of Joseph, Genesis 41:51. The root of this verb is commonly given as itzt, but see Baker's Lexicon, where it is also given as tzt. It is evidently from this root that the Sanskrit sutti, already referred to, must come, S-U-T-T-E-E. Matutinus is evidently just the correlate of Matuta, goddess of the morning. Janus, therefore, as Matutinus, is Lucifer, son of the morning. But further, Matuta is identified with Ino, after she had plunged into the sea and had, along with her son Melikerta, been changed into a sea divinity. Consequently, her son Melikerta, king of the walled city, is the same as Janus Matutinus, or Lucifer, Phaethon, or Nimrod. There is still yet another link by which Melikerta The sea divinity, or Janus Matutinus, is identified with the primitive god of the fire worshippers. The most common name of Ino, or Matuta, after she had passed through the waters, was Loikotoe. Read Ovid's Metamorphoses. Now, Loikotoe, or Loikotea, has a double meaning, as it is derived either from luchot, which signifies to light or set on fire, or from luchot, to glean. Lukot. In the Maltese medal, the ear of corn at the side of the goddess, which is more commonly held in her hand, while really referring in its hidden meaning to her being the mother of Bar, the sun, to the uninitiated exhibits her as Spizilega, or the gleaner, the popular name, says Heidi. For the female, with the ear of wheat represented in the constellation Virgo. In Bryant, Cybele is represented with 2 or 3 ears of corn in her hand, for as there were 3 peculiarly distinguished Bacchuses, there were consequently as many Bars, and she might therefore be represented with 1, 2, or 3 ears in her hand. But to revert to the Maltese medal just referred to, the flames coming out of the head of Lucotea, the gleaner, show that though she has passed through the waters, she is still Lucotea, the burner or light giver. And the rays around the mitre of the god in a reverse entirely agree with the character of that god as Eleleus, or Phaeton, in other words as the shining Baal. Now this shining Baal, as Melikerta, king of the walled city, occupies the very place of Allah Mahozim, whose representative the Pope is elsewhere proved to be, but he is equally the sea divinity, who in that capacity wears the mitre of Dagon. The fish-head mitre which the Pope wears shows that in this character also, as the beast from the sea, he is the unquestionable representative of Melikerta. The Roman imperial standard of the dragon, a symbol of fire worship. The passage of Ammianus Marcellinus that speaks of that standard calls it purpureum signum draconis. On this may be raised the question, has the epithet purpureum as describing the color of the dragon any reference to fire? The following extract from Salverte may cast some light upon it. The dragon figured among the military ensigns of the Assyrians. Cyrus caused it to be adopted by the Persians and Medes. Under the Roman emperors and under the emperors of Byzantium, each cohort or centuria bore for an ensign a dragon. There is no doubt that the dragon or serpent stands of the Assyrians and Persians had reference to fire worship, the worship of fire and the serpent being mixed up together in both these countries. As the Romans, therefore, borrowed these standards evidently from these sources, it is to be presumed that they viewed them in the very same light as those from whom they borrowed them, especially as that light was so exactly in harmony with their own system of fire worship. The epithet purpureus, or purple, does not indeed naturally convey the idea of fire color to us, but it does convey the idea of red, and red in one shade or another among idolatrous nations has almost with one consent been used to represent fire. The Egyptians, Bunsen, and the Hindus, Moors Pantheon, Brahma, the Assyrians, Layard's Nineveh, all represented fire by red. The Persians evidently did the same, for when Quintus Curtius describes the Magi as following, the sacred and eternal fire, he describes the 365 youths who formed the train of these Magi as clad in scarlet garments, the color of these garments no doubt having reference to the fire whose ministers they were. Puniceus is equivalent to purpureus, for it was in Phoenicia that the purpura or purple fish was originally found. The color derived from that purple fish was scarlet, and it is the very name of that Phoenician purple fish, Arguna, that is used in Daniel 5:16 and 19, where it is said that he that should interpret the handwriting on the wall should be clothed in scarlet. The Tyrians had the art of making true purples as well as scarlet, and there seems no doubt that purpureus is frequently used in the ordinary sense attached to our word purple. But the original meaning of the epithet is scarlet, and as bright scarlet color is a natural color to represent fire, so we have reason to believe that that color, when used for robes of state among the Tyrians, had special reference to fire, for the Tyrian Hercules, who was regarded as the inventor of purple, Bryant, was regarded as king of fire, Nonnus Dionysiaca. Now when we find that the purpura of Tyre produced the scarlet color, which naturally represented fire, and that puniceus, which is equivalent to purpureus, is evidently used for scarlet, there is nothing that forbids us to understand purpureus in the same sense here, but rather requires it. But even though it were admitted that the tinge was deeper and purpureus meant the true purple, as in red, of which it is a shade, is the established color of fire, and as the serpent was the universally acknowledged symbol of fire worship, the probability is strong that the use of a red dragon as the imperial standard of Rome was designed as an emblem of that system of fire worship on which the safety of the empire was believed to vitally to hinge. And I say it once again, a dragon or a snake has most of the time a poison. When she bites you with that poison, it will make you burn. So there you have another correlation of the burning of the sun and the solar rays and the burning of the poison. And so we can see this whole fire worship, sun worship, serpent worship thing, it makes